morning. This is Hannah Klein. Welcome to my podcast, Hannah Klein's Time. Before starting my podcast, I have to say, please do not forget to subscribe to my Substack, and also kind donations are appreciated. Uh, they'll be used for my work, research, and so forth. Um, so today, well, not exactly today, I'm sorry. It's yesterday. I did record an interview yesterday. The guest's name is Suzi Kota. She is an author of a book, American Woman versus Sharia Law: The Guide to Win This Invisible War. Um, I'm not exactly sure how many people know about Sharia law. Well, especially like probably in Japan, like those who are interested in probably Islamic studies. I don't know why. They like to theorize such ideologies in a sense. And so I would like to criticize that, and at the same time, uh, well, yeah. Before starting this podcast, I have to also say that Susie's book could be obtained on Amazon, on Kindle, and also a paper book. And so, if you are interested in Sharia law, I would recommend not just Sharia law and Jihadism. I would recommend reading her book because she describes Jihadism in a manner that's very much more, well, not like using all the academic terms to explain everything and so forth. So, but anyway, we discussed October 7th, actually, but and jihadism, and not just that. To me, this ideology goes back to 2001, 9/11. I mean, that was something unforgettable, and I was very shocked for many reasons. If you listen to our conversation, you will notice why in many ways. And um, but anyway, I hope you listen to our conversation first. So, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I was looking forward to speaking with you for many reasons because Sharia law, the topic that you have been, you wrote about, is something that my friend was talking about, who was deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq. They were talking about it. They were against it. They were strongly
Yes.
against it. And so but the crazy part is that uh like you know in the Western countries, we see jihadism and Sharia law practiced, and the imam praising Sharia law these days. And I think that it is very, very alarming to see it, really. And what do you think about
So,
New York, by the way?
uh, Um,
Or
so do you want me
like,
to give
the United States in general, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so I love America, right? So I'm a U.S. citizen, and I love I love the liberties that we have here, and there's from the perspective of being a female in the U.S. One of the things that I write in the book. So by way of introduction, my name is Suzi Kota. I'm the author of American Women versus Sharia Law: The Guide to Win This Invisible War, and I wrote this book it was actually following the October 7th terrorist attack in Israel because I couldn't understand how on that day 45 Americans were killed, 7 were kidnapped,
Yes.
51 have since been killed.
Yes.
It was the largest mass killing of Americans since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus was not at all on Americans. And, again, there was empathy for Israel for what felt like 48 hours. And
Mm-hmm.
then it flipped to, oh goodness, Gaza are the victims. Okay. And so, I have studied jihad for 20 years, but what I didn't realize was that the jihad propaganda in the West was so strong that this entire narrative could be completely flipped and flipped so quickly and be so mainstream. And so then when I started doing a little bit more research into what was happening specifically in the US, because my research had primarily focused on Europe, because I think it's pretty obvious that Europe has a massive
And that's
jihadist
exactly like
problem.
that. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
I realized that there had been quite already an infiltration of Muslim Brotherhood associates and associated and backed organization in America, and this was hugely affecting the political climate and hugely affecting what was being displayed in the media, right? And so consistently, obviously, I have empathy for anyone in Israel who was murdered in the attack, taken hostage. I'm wearing my hostage necklace and haven't taken it off
Yes. I do have
since
one
until
too.
all the
Yeah.
hostages are home.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of
But the
course.
fact that people seem to in America were glossing over the fact that dozens and dozens of Americans were killed and dozens and dozens and Americans were being literally held alive captive by a terrorist organization, and it was hard to even see a story about it in the media was really what shocked me, right? And then I thought, you know what, this is the time for women in America to understand. And this book is really for women everywhere, across the world. I live in America. I'm most familiar with how we live here.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to write something that, that could showcase, look, how we live in America, right? And then how laws specifically related to Sharia law
Mhm.
would affect women living in America. So, look, there's a little bit of humor in the book. I make light of certain situations. I talk about elements of pop culture, like the Real Housewives.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, there are very specific verses from the Quran and the Hadith, which is where Sharia law comes from in Islam.
Mhm.
And then there are very specific dozens of situations where I talk about women and children who have been brutally murdered, raped, held captive in a way that Sharia law excuses. So that basically is the overview.
Well, see, October 7th, it was, if you support Israel, if you have looked at Israel for a long time, um, probably it's very shocking that it happened. But at
Yes.
the same time, what's shocking is that, they actually really did it, and American people have died, and some people who lost their relatives have approached me actually, right after it, told me that's not human, right? I mean, simple, very.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, so in the book, right, I talk about a variety of different situations of things that have happened due to jihad, Islamic warfare, and things that are basically
Yes.
permitted by Sharia law. So, when we were talking a little bit earlier, we were talking about a situation of a young girl in Somalia who was 13 years old. She was raped by three men, and
Mm.
she ended up being stoned to death because under Sharia law, if you're raped, it's
Yes.
viewed as adultery, which sounds completely
Yes.
backwards in any democracy.
Mm.
And so she was punished, and the three men walked scot free, right? And so this is just one of the many examples of injustices. However, in the book, there are many, many different aspects of the October 7th attack that I do talk about. And I have read every forensic report. I have met with, hostage families. I have done extensive research. Unfortunately, part of that research did include watching some of the footage that's not public, watching some of the footage that is public, recently, and it's on my X feed. I'm at Suzi Kota on X. But I, most recently last week posted about the Paramount documentary called We Will Dance Again,
Mhm.
Surviving the Nova Festival. And what's very interesting about that Nova Festival, right? Because the issues in Israel, people commonly mistake for a land dispute. This isn't a land dispute, okay?
Mm.
This October 7th attack was a jihad Islamic terror attack. And how do I know this? Because when you watch the GoPro videos
Mm.
of the Hamas fighters, they say it themselves. They say it repeatedly. This is a victory for
That,
Islam. Our
yeah.
time has come for jihad.
Mm.
Exactly. And so then you go back to the verses in the Quran, some of which I quote in the book, right? And I'll read a couple out if that's okay, so your listeners can truly understand. Chapter 9, verse 5. Slay the infidels wherever you find them. You find them, lay siege to them, and take them captive. Okay? So the term kafir, infidel, means non-believer. So whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Jew, whether you're a Buddhist, whether you're Hindu. And oh, by the way, on October 7th, Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists were killed. They were killed. Again, another aspect of the attack that gets no attention.
Mm.
Chapter 9, verse 29, fight the Jews and Christians until they pay you the poll tax and they feel subdued. Okay, so again, in Islamic hardcore Sharia law cultures, if you are not a Muslim, you're considered dhimmi. You're a second class citizen. I mean, they
Oh, yeah.
citizen is a strong word, and they want you to pay a tax. They want you to pay a jizya tax. I actually just posted today about the case in Syria where a Christian man was killed because he refused to pay the jizya tax to the Muslims. It's right on my feed. It's documented. It's in the news. Yet we continue to ignore this. Just one more verse, chapter 9, verse 33. Islam is made prevail over every religion. And again, when you live in America,
Mhm.
and you see Christians and Jews and Hindus and atheists and secular people, getting along and living life. And yes, do we have certain problems in America? Absolutely. But let me tell you, it is a wonderful country. Some, political disputes aside, women, have made huge gains in terms of employment, in terms of wages. Are we 100% at parity? No, there's still some work to be done, but we're so far ahead of where we started, and women can go, women can do anything here, right? And so, are we perfect? No, but we're pretty darn good. And I happen to love it here. And I happen to want to advocate for American values and Western civilization
Sure.
and Western values.
You know,
Yeah.
I invited a columnist, who is very young, high school student. He, when I was talking with him, what I said, about the United States is that what's great about the United States is it's a country of diversity and equality, inclusion, really.
Yes.
I mean, you know
Yeah.
what? I'm not talking about DEI, but it's a part of culture really, to
It really is, right? And I think, the ultra woke pieces had taken something and maybe gone a little bit, overboard And again, different people have different opinions, but truly, baked in the Civil Rights Act, right, is equality. So it's not like we don't have, even though President Trump, has made some changes to kind of bring us back to, I think, a little bit level and even, the core legislation protecting equal rights
Mhm.
remains in America. And I do worry that there's a lot of misinformation about that, because it's simply not true that anybody's rights have been repealed.
Yes, exactly. So that's another thing that I asked Gregory to explain the other day.
Yes.
But actually the news, the Japanese news is very, very biased. And it's very shocking to say, well, they were talking about Trump's, some of the policies, racist, undemocratic, all these things. And it was very strange in some ways to me because they have not exactly done that far, even though they have this rhetoric. But, it is very terrible, really, what they were saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very hard because the mainstream media, it's a very weird cognitive dissonance. It's a very strange suicidal empathy. It's almost as though they've abandoned common sense completely. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't really know how to explain it other than using that terminology.
Mm.
But what I can tell you is most Americans believe in legal immigration, right? And some
Yes,
of that
exactly.
immigration does
Yeah.
include, yeah, does include vetted refugees, okay? But that's not what happened under the Biden administration. What happened under the Biden administration was millions and millions of unvetted people, unverified asylum seekers, criminals, walked across the border, were human trafficked across the border, including 300,000 children, which the Biden administration lost track of. And now, under Borders Are Tom Homan, there are many ops to try to find those children and bring them to safety. This is not what happened, right? But unfortunately, when you follow the coverage, you see that that's not what really is reported. And so it's a little bit the same thing as Israel, if I'm being honest with you, where you've got this propaganda, you've got this narrative where it's simply not true, right? And that's really, really challenging when you're somebody who is advocating against Sharia law and advocating against jihad, when you have this example of a country
Mm.
that, look, there's 2 million Muslims that live in Israel proper with full equal rights. There's Druze, there's Bedouin, there's Armenians, and there are ultra religious Jews, and then there are ultra secular Jews who want nothing, you know what I mean, who aren't religious at all, right?
Mm.
And that's fine, that's great, that's all accepted, right? But you've got this narrative that's so counter to what is presented, and then how the conflict is presented is
Mm.
also problematic. Again, this book primarily focuses on Sharia law in the West and Sharia law in America, but there is a little section where I talk specifically about Israel. And the reason I talk about it is because it was a brutal jihad attack, and
Mm.
because sexual violence was used, and the Quran and the Hadith specifically allow for sexual violence to be used as part of war, their jihad against non-Muslims. So that does include Jews. And it was extremely brutal and horrific what Hamas did to those girls at the Nova Festival. And the fact that yet again this week you had the Dina report come out, because yet again people are
Yes.
denying that this happened, when it's literally on video with photographic evidence that this happened, as well as dozens and dozens of witness statements and statements from hostages that were in captivity
Mm.
saying, yes, this happened, including American Keith Siegel, who confirmed
Oh,
that
yes,
he.
that was awful that he said. Yeah. I mean, what he went through is just terrible. And I'm just so sorry
Exactly.
what happened to him, really. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, it's just unbelievable to me that yet again,
Mm.
the Israelis have to defend and prove that these things happened. happened, right? So it's, yet you get all kinds of allegations out of Gaza where they're saying things happened that just literally never happened, right? Now, no one's going to deny right now that it's been a difficult war, and that certainly there are, some innocent civilians have died, and it's terrible and it's tragic, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants that in Israel.
But
Nobody wants that in the
but
West.
no.
But unfortunately, when you've got Hamas
Mhm,
using human shields,
mhm.
and you've got Hamas holding hostages, and
Yes.
they're shooting rockets at any opportunity, and they have weapons, what are you supposed to do? I mean, do you really want to send a message as a democracy? Okay. And so let's say this happened in another country. Let's say it happened in Italy. Let's say it happened in America. Are you going to allow a terrorist organization
No.
to kidnap?
Oh,
No,
just
you're
please
not, right?
don't.
You're yeah, no, 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 no. But I'm saying, like,
Right?
for the
Yeah.
people who are
No, I
for the
mean,
people who are on the other
yeah,
side, it's crazy. They kidnap 250 people, and you're supposed to just let them. You're supposed to just negotiate. You're not supposed to fight for your citizens, and they're
mhm,
still shooting rockets at any opportunity. I mean, it's literally insane. It's literally insane.
yes. I mean, see, if the United States allows terrorism, there is going to be a huge consequence to Japan because the terrorists are going to
Yes,
Japan too, right?
yes. I think that I would agree with you, and I think Japan is a key ally of the United States, as
Agree.
is
Yeah,
most countries in Europe, as is South Korea, right? We have
yeah,
40,000 troops in
yeah.
South Korea.
Hmm.
And, we have to collectively fight. I will say this, I disagreed with many policies of George W. Bush. I agreed with some, I disagreed with some. But one of the things that he said that he was always right about is that there is an axis of evil.
Oh,
And that
yes. Oh,
axis of
yeah.
evil is threatened by democracies. And look, is every democracy perfect? Absolutely not. But they are threatened by it. And this is why countries that value democracy need to be working together and need to be communicating and partnering. And right now there's a red and a green alliance, right? The socialists, Marxists, Islamists are working together. And again, I'm only on X. The only social media that I do is X. But this is where all you can find, for your listeners in Japan, if they want to read the book, of course I would love that. You have to have a Kindle. If you have a Kindle, you can download it on Kindle.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's available on in the US
On
on Amazon
paperback,
and
right?
Barnes and
Yeah,
Noble.
I saw
Yeah, it's a
part of it.
paper,
Yeah.
yeah, paperback. Yeah, here it is. Here, I'll show you. Here's my
Yeah.
book.
I actually
But you
put
can read
that
it on
out on
Kindle.
Instagram and
Oh,
introduced the
thank
book.
you. But yeah, no, we need to be working together because democracy, right, or being a constitutional republic, having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right,
Mhm.
whatever that looks like in its different way, from
Yeah.
Japan to South Korea to Germany to
Mhm.
France to the United States to Canada. It's worth fighting for. It's worth fighting for. And right now, the reason that I use the term invisible war in the title of my book is we are in an invisible war. People
I
don't
mean,
aren't
we are
necessarily seeing it.
already at war,
We
really.
we are already at war,
And
100%.
this started actually September 11th, really, in a sense.
Yes, yes,
That's
I
something,
agree completely. The
uh
worst.
yes. And I mean, remembering I know some of the people who lost their friends, because
Yeah,
they lived in New York. But I mean, just it was just so shocking. And it was not funny. It was just so, I mean, terrible what happened
I
to
mean
the innocent
it's
people. And
just
the
completely
first
innocent people.
responders and all these courageous people who, sacrificed for the country. That was such a sad day, after that, you know, there has been Iraq war, and I often talk about this, but um, I just do not want to say that there was nothing wrong with this Iraq. I mean, Iraq had a lot of wrongdoing, and I mean, some of the Japanese journalists, make, facilitate the explanations and say, for example, well, the United States has been involved in the war, which is not necessary. I mean, I would not say that it was not totally necessary. Maybe there was some mistake, but I would say I would not deny, um the axis of evil, really, the existence of evil, the Muslim Brotherhood,
Yeah, no, most certainly, right. And so here's what I would say. Number one, anytime the US military is deployed anywhere, they have my full support, right? Whether,
Yes.
it doesn't matter where it is, what type of mission it is, they
Mm-hmm.
truly are our heroes.
Mm-hmm.
I also think any of our first responders, law enforcement, fire, paramedic, and ICE are also they work for us, and we should appreciate them. Does that mean everything, does that mean that no individual ever doesn't make a mistake? Certainly not, but they are walking into the line of fire to basically protect our country, both domestically and internationally. I am not somebody that has studied the Iraq war, too extensively. I think that there is certainly some questionable aspects of the motivations. But again, I've not studied it extensively. I have studied Afghanistan though, and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately with Afghanistan, and there really are some great people and great intelligence officers that you can follow. Sarah Adams would be one of them, former CIA. Unfortunately, with Afghanistan, it tends to be a terror hotbed
Mm-hmm.
that then breeds other areas, right? I think we also know that the withdrawal was a complete disaster. How it was done, the negotiations, the service members that we lost at the Abbey Gate bombing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was the withdrawal under the Biden administration was a complete disaster, and failure. I do think under a Trump administration, it would have been done very differently. But of course, we don't have a time machine, right? We have to deal with what we have to deal with. Unfortunately, what's happening now with Afghanistan, and again, I'm going to bring this back to the October 7th attack, is that they have now in August 21, so it's been almost 4 years, they are now setting up terror training camps, or they have set up terror training camps. And so basically you've got different terrorist organizations, right? So you've got, I talk about this in the book, there's Boko Haram in Nigeria, again, Islamic terrorist group. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood, which is started in Egypt and it's expanded out. It is a jihad terrorist group organization, but it's also a political party, and it's banned in many countries in the Middle East. For some reason, it's not banned in any Western country, which makes no sense. And even some of the very, I think, influential and important Muslim activists, which is something else I talk about in the book, right? Because there are some very important voices in the Muslim world trying to warn the West against this type of extremism. And we ignore them, right? You've got Al Qaeda, which is based primarily in Afghanistan, but now they've got franchises all through the Middle East and all through Africa. You've got ISIS, right? Again, same type of a thing. And so now they're working together a little bit more. They're selling services, and in fact, a number of the elite Hamas fighters went and trained in Afghanistan for
Yes,
the
that's
October
what I
7th
read.
attack.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was reading on other social media platform where there are terror analysts, they were, talking about the reports about it. I mean,
Yes.
you know what? October 7th did not happen out of vacuum, as Guterres says. But you know what? Guterres ignores the fact, that you know, Israel is the victim,
Yeah.
obviously.
Oh, certainly.
And like,
Yeah. And
like,
I mean, look,
yeah, go
you
ahead.
can question kind of why it happened from and I was going to say, so you can question why it happened from an intelligence, perspective. I think, certainly, and Benjamin Netanyahu has said this, certainly they were surprised, certainly they didn't expect it. And I think the hard part And you have to look at it. Look, here's the thing: you do have to look at it as, hey, we failed here. What can we do differently? How can we prevent this from happening again? Okay. However, 3,000 Hamas fighters invaded Israel. 3,000 Gazan civilians, and I want your listeners to know I'm using civilians in air
Oh, I
quotes,
heard that
invaded Israel.
60,000. It's 60,000.
It wasn't it wasn't quite that high. The official reports
Really?
say it
Oh,
was
okay.
over 6,000. Yeah. But what I would say is when you then kind of analyze where people breached,
Mm-hmm.
the the everyday Israeli law enforcement, okay, the police officers, the fire people, the security at the kibbutzim, and then when the IDF was able to respond and get themselves mobilized, keep in mind they had only ever trained for a breach that happened in one site. They didn't anticipate a breach in over, I've heard different numbers, I've read different numbers, 25 to 60 locations is what I've read where the Gaza border was reached. And we do know it was air, land, and sea that they breached. Okay. And the whole idea of they overwhelmed with the rockets, they overwhelmed the Iron
Yes.
Dome, right? And so look, do I think they're guilty of a little bit of hubris? Certainly, okay. But the bravery, the absolute bravery of every single day Israeli people to fight back, to save their children, to fight for themselves, to fight for their kibbutz, to be smart with no training is awe-inspiring. And people who helped other people out, I mean, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of stories of 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 bravery that's just almost unimaginable with no training, with no notice. What was your first instinct? Your first instinct was to try to help other people. And what saddens me about the US is that was the same attitude on September 11th. The firefighters, the police, certain civilians wouldn't leave the building because they were helping people get out, right? And nowadays, would that happen? I mean, we had a lady in New York set on fire on the subway with other people around and nobody did anything. I mean, it's crazy and it worries me culturally in America because I would like to think people would step in and help out in a difficult situation. And unfortunately, because of the media and because we've gotten a little bit polarized, I worry that that type of a thing wouldn't necessarily happen in the same way where you're fighting for your neighbor and you're fighting for the good of your country against something that is just completely evil. And again, you had no notice, no training, complete surprise. And, and it was awful and horrific, but truly it could have been a lot worse. And if not for the bravery of all those folks that I mentioned in Israel, it would have been a lot worse. But everyday people truly acted as heroes in an instant.
I have said this, but in the area that was attacked, those areas, people cared, people were for, Palestinian people. They brought, Palestinian people to the hospital in Israel, for example. I mean, it's terrible what happened to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a good point. So one
I mean,
of
it's
the
unacceptable.
findings,
They hurt people
uh,
whom, yeah.
who were helping them. Yeah, they
Yeah.
they hurt they hurt they basically shot themselves in the foot. The largest peace activists, were many of the peace, I shouldn't say the largest, but the largest peace activists, many of the peace activists in Israel were the ones that got specifically targeted. Now, I like to use the term Gazan. Okay, so the reason I like to use the term Gaza, it's Gaza, they're Gazans, civilians, and then the West Bank, which is actually Judea and Samaria, it's often referred to incorrectly as the West Bank. But the it's important that folks go back in history and take a read of the Treaty of San Remo of
Oh, yes, yes.
1922. And the Treaty of San Remo is where, following this is an important little bit of history. So, following the fall of the Ottoman Empire, so remember in World War I, the Ottoman Empire sided with Germany and they lost, right? And so you had, Great Britain and France, and to a certain extent the US, Italy, that were involved in saying, okay, well, this is the former Ottoman Empire, and how are we going to, split up these territories? And so there was a conference at San Remo in 1920. There was another conference in 1922. And in 1922 is when the Treaty of San Remo was signed. And this is when the borders for Lebanon, Iraq, Transjordan, okay, Syria, and then the mandate for Palestine was established. And so at that point, Palestine, which was a region that had been named by the Romans, Syria Palestina, and that was just the region, had been renamed for being the Kingdom of Israel, the Kingdom of Judea, right? Because we know that Jews have lived in Judea, they're indigenous to Judea for over 3,000 years. And the area was basically split up, okay? And so the ancestral Jewish homeland under the Balfour Declaration basically got split up into two, to basically say, hey, look, there's a bunch of different groups here. However, the Arab Muslims are, a majority, and we're going to give them Transjordan, and then Israel will be the Jewish homeland, right? There have been a continual presence of Jews, particularly in Jerusalem, Hebron, in Judea and Samaria for, 3,000 years, right? And this happened in 1922, but unfortunately, due to Arab pressure, the British, who were basically occupying and managing the territory, set strict immigration limits for Jews, and then were really very sympathetic to the Arab Muslim, because they didn't want them to have the land, right? And unfortunately, the British didn't really understand Islam. They didn't understand that there was an issue with the fact that under Islam, you cannot let non-Muslims rule Muslims. I'm going to say that again. You can't let non-Muslims rule Muslims. And if a territory had been under Muslim rule, and remember the Ottoman Empire were Turks, but they were Sunni Muslim Turks. And so to then say, okay, well, this will be a Jewish homeland administered by Jews, this is where jihad comes in. And this is where Islamic warfare comes in, and they will use any tool in their toolbox to undermine this, okay? And so the idea that now, and then you can get into, well, Yasser Arafat recreated the Palestinian people. I mean, originally, Palestinians were Jews. It was referred to until 1948. Exactly. You know what I mean? If you look at the soccer team or you look at the symphony, right? There was the Star of David everywhere, right? And suddenly this propaganda campaign started in 1964 by Yasser Arafat, who, by the way, was Egyptian. Okay, he was born in Cairo, and you had this whole
Soviet
new
mob,
campaign.
Right? He was a Soviet.
Yes, exactly, right. Yeah, and so people, unfortunately, we don't read history. You have too many youth getting their history and information off of TikTok, right? And of course, I will just say the Communist Republic of China is quite happy for youth in Western countries to be distracted by something happening in Israel, because guess what? If you're talking about Israel, then you're not talking about human rights abuses in China. If you're talking about Israel, you're not talking about human rights abuses in Iran or Russia. And you're not talking about North Korea, right? And that those are the key evil alliance. So for them, for TikTok to be used to promote this algorithm, it's the world's greatest distraction. Let's worry about Israel, which is the size of New Jersey, and it's 8,000 square miles, where you have 22 Muslim nations, right? Arab Muslim nations. Yeah. There's 57 Muslim nations total, but that's 5 million square miles. Like, at what point is anybody going to use common sense and say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense? How is it possible that Israel, with 8,000 square miles, which, by the way, there's 2 million Muslim Arabs that live there and they have equal rights, but where are the Jews in Algeria? Well, they got kicked out. They got sent to Israel in 1948. Oh, yes. Where are the Jews in Tunisia? They got kicked out. They got sent to Israel. Where are the Jews in Yemen? They got kicked out. So wait a second. This just doesn't make sense when you start to unpack and you listen to it. And then when you understand Islam and you understand the Quran and the Hadith and you understand Sharia law, you realize that this is just a very large jihad propaganda, and they will use any tool in their toolbox because they want their ummah, they want to establish their global Islamic caliphate, and their first step to achieving that is to destroy Israel, right? And but don't think it's going to stop there. It's not going to stop there, right? I mean, if I was in Spain right now, which was Al and had been under more Islamic rule for many years, I would be pretty darn worried about what the plans are for Spain. So, it's important that people, sit back and learn and read. At the end of my book, I also suggest a bunch of different readings. Depending on what you're interested in, right? And so if you're interested in learning about woke mind virus, Gad Saad's book, The Parasitic Mind, is very good to read. If you're very interested in the Israel conflict, Robert Spencer's book, The Palestinian Delusion, is a very good book to read. If you're interested in CIA ops and what happened in Benghazi in Libya, and you're interested in Al Qaeda, yes, Sarah Adams' book, Know Thy Enemy, is the best book to read. So there's lots of different resources also where people can learn more, and then you've got to sit back and create, make your own opinions.
Well, that's exactly, I think that, your book is very easy to approach, you know, you know,
Yes, it's
to
not complicated. Yes.
no, I mean, in good ways, like people are able to, grab something first, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
get the idea, of
Yes.
broad idea of what's going on. And also, it's not that broad ideal, but, it's very, very, I guess, very well explained. I really think that way because, some of the terms like used, like it's very, very well like explained. So, I think that people who would like to really understand, you know, jihadism, which is which is really
Yes.
the key to understanding October 7th, you know. It's really true. Because I was
Exactly. Understanding October 7th, but then also understanding September 11th in
Mhm.
2021, and then understanding, the Benghazi attack, and then understanding, I mean, let's think about it. There has been we just passed the 20th anniversary of the bus bombings in London, right? Over 50 people were killed, right? And then let's think about this. There's been huge jihad attacks in Nice, France. There's been huge jihad attacks in Madrid, Spain. There's been huge jihad attacks in Paris, huge jihad attacks in London, huge jihad attacks in Manchester. There was a huge jihad attack in the United States at Heat nightclub in Orlando. There was a jihad attack this year, self-radicalized ISIS sympathizer on January 1st in New Orleans. And literally people like me, people like you are going crazy saying, why are we ignoring this? Why aren't Western countries creating a comprehensive plan to insulate ourselves from this terrorism?
Yeah.
And which is exactly what it is. It's the fight between the believers and the non-believers. They stated, and unfortunately, it's happening too often for us to ignore. I'll make one more point on this, right? Because one of the things that I do talk about in the book, and it's awful, but you have to understand it, is the concept of beheadings. Okay,
Oh yeah,
why do you see
that's awful.
why do you
Yes.
see it's awful Christians in Nigeria
Mm,
being beheaded?
mm,
Horrific. Why then do you see journalists and aid workers in Syria? It's very far. People also need to look at maps. It's
mm,
very far. Nigeria and Syria are very far. But why are you seeing the same behavior? And then if you go to Pakistan and you study what happened to Daniel Pearl and him being kidnapped and then beheaded, do you know why you're seeing the same behavior across this huge geography? Because it's the same ideology. It's jihad. It is jihad. And it says, strike them at the neck. In my book, I talk about this, and it's awful and it's horrific and it must stop. But it's not going to stop if we ignore it. It's not going to stop if we don't talk about it. And it's not going to stop if our government doesn't take very specific actions to insulate ourselves against, first of all, people coming to this country with this ideology, people staying in this country with this ideology, and then some policy changes to make sure that we're banning Sharia law and we're enforcing the ban. We're banning the Muslim Brotherhood and we're enforcing the ban. And we bring people here that value democracy and liberty and the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Our values, our constitution. And that's the same. You can look at Japan, you can look at South Korea, you can look at Germany. Again, I'm using all these same examples, right? Because again, we've got some different cultures, some different laws, some different setups, but at the end of the day, people get to vote, people get a say, and people just want to live their life peacefully, work, make a contribution, maybe raise a family. And these are all wonderful and good things. We don't need some evil ideology come and disrupting that. And as women, we want to wear a little bit of makeup. We want to get our hair done. We want to be able to pick out clothes. And again, we don't need companionship laws or oppression, telling us what to do and how to behave.
I mean, you know, it's, this is not about the difference in value, really, and, one problem is that, a lot of people tend to misunderstand Muslim Brotherhood. And this is something,
Yes, that
I
is true.
actually,
Yes.
have understood by listening to Al Jazeera the whole time. Like, because I get to
Right,
hear,
right. That's a very good point.
I get
Yeah,
to
I mean,
hear
I have
everything. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I have and I apologize, I've got to go in about 3 minutes. I mean, this has been a great discussion. I'm happy to come back. But yeah, in my book, I actually talk about the Muslim Brotherhood in my girls' trip chapter. And the reason for that is because, again, the structure of the book is basically going through different aspects culturally of how women live, in the West, in America, in democracies.
Mhm. Mhm.
Was to resort Islam to a fundamentalist movement, restore the caliphate, and enact Sharia law. In his own words, he stated, "It is in the nature of Islam to dominate, not to be dominated, to impose its law on all nations, to extend its power to the entire planet." And currently, it's estimated that there are 80 Muslim Brotherhood chapters in 80 countries, and they're part of the Sunni branch of Islam. They advocate for violence, terrorism, and seek weapons of mass destruction to achieve their objective of a global Islamic caliphate. Statements from Brotherhood leadership are as follows. Just two more points. The change that the Muslim nation seeks can be attained through jihad and sacrifice, and by raising a jihadi generation that pursues death just as enemies pursue life. Muslim Brotherhood Supreme Guide, Mohammed Badi, September 2010. Again, prior to the Libya attacks, we must possess nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons in order to strike terror in our enemies. If we had nuclear weapons, they would be afraid to attack us. Muslim Brotherhood spiritual leader Yusuf al-Qaradawi, this was in a sermon in 2009, and this is all sourced. So, and then we talk a little bit about the Benghazi attack, which Sarah Adams and Dave Benton did the most comprehensive post investigation of.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually am inviting, a person who is going to be doing the propaganda real professionally. But what you mentioned, is actually very important to lead to that discussion because
Yes.
jihadism itself, understanding it, the nature of it, and also, it we cannot virtualize it, as a theological cult we or whatever, teaching, in because the Islamic Republic, they tend this country tends to be some kind of like ideological mystery, and also another problem is that Gaza. tends to be, you know, propagated.
This
They
is
are
this is
propagated, really.
I mean, this is correct, right? And I mean, we could do a whole other podcast
Sure.
on
Yeah.
Qatar, right? And their role in, their role basically in Mark Levin actually has some of the best material on this. Their role in infiltrating universities in the West, their role in influencing governments, their role in enabling the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, it's
Yep.
plain and simple, right? And then you get into the whole dynamic of the Sunni versus the Shia and who's working together and who's not working together. And that gets kind of tribalistic and complicated. But at the end of the day, jihad is jihad. And it's not good for people who want to, for
So
Christians, for Jews, for
basically,
Hindus. Yeah. I mean, like I care less a little bit about, splitting hairs on which group is supporting what. I mean, at the end of the day, it's important to understand, in the intelligence community to counter it. But, for us, we have to fundamentally understand jihad and what the difference is. Hold on one
yeah,
sec.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
So I, so,
so,
so
okay, go ahead. Oh, okay. So thank you so much for coming to my podcast. And, I
thank you
hope
so much
that,
for having me.
yeah, I hope that, you come back,
Yes.
again pretty soon. So,
Yes. I would love to. Thank you for
okay.
having me.
So I have to let you go and have a nice afternoon. Okay,
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.
So, today's topic, it was a little hard. I think that it was hard for everyone who has families, uh, who um, victims, I have to say, on October 7th, September 11th. You know, it it's it's very very uh, shocking, and I am personally very shocked in many ways, and I hope to invite. Well, I would like to invite Suzi um, after her extensive. Uh, I guess I have to say that I would like to invite her again on my podcast, and I cannot exactly tell when right now, but probably in August, and discuss various topics of October 7th and um, the suicidal jihadism. And I expect Hamas to unconditionally surrender. And I hope they do not use hostages. I'm talking about Hamas. I hope Hamas does not use hostages as a game card. Okay, this is a coward. And this is a psychological warfare against the civilized world in the first place. Okay. And so, well, I hope that hope and pray that the peace is restored. And I am truly heartbroken and just feel terrible for the losses of the IDF members. Tomorrow I'm going to hear something terrible in the morning, and I'm sure I will. But anyway, it's Shabbat evening for the Jewish people. In Israel, it's in the evening. It's kind of like today's the same day in the morning in New York, in the United States. So American people are going to experience Shabbat Saturday, this well, coming hours. So I hope that people have peaceful Shabbat. And I am going to invite Susan Kota tomorrow, or I'm not exactly sure. Well, in a well, very soon. I am inviting her, and we will be discussing Al Jazeera. And probably the Japanese people might wonder why, they're talking about the number of the victims, so forth and forth. There are clear reasons why I would like to blame them as propaganda. And not just for the number of victims, but for many other reasons. But anyway, I hope that you listen to my podcast again, and I hope you have a good evening. Good night.